Anna kneeled by the gravestone, her fingers tracing the name etched into the cold surface. The wind rustled the branches above her, and a shiver ran down her spine. She took a deep breath, but it didn't do much to calm her racing heart. She set down a small toy, a soft stuffed rabbit, faded and well-loved. It used to belong to her daughter. Anna adjusted it on the grass, making sure it wouldn't tip over in the breeze. Hey, baby," she whispered, her voice almost drowned out by the rustling leaves. "I brought your favorite." Anna's body felt heavy. Her knees ached against the hard ground, but she didn't move. The silence of the cemetery wrapped around her, pressing in from all sides. The world around her was gray. Only the patch of ground in front of her seemed real. The rest was blurred, distant. She closed her eyes, and her mind drifted back. Her work shift, the sound of the register beeping, the manager's voice snapping at her when she zoned out, her mom's raspy cough when she got home last night, echoing down the hallway of their tiny apartment, the bills piling up on the kitchen table. It all blurred together, but somehow, none of it felt as real as the tiny stuffed rabbit on the grave. Anna let out a shaky sigh and wiped at her eyes with the back of her sleeve. She opened her mouth to speak again, to say something, anything, but no words came. What else was there to say? She slowly stood, wincing as her legs protested. Just as she turned to leave, her eyes caught sight of movement. An elderly woman stood a few yards away, watching her. Anna paused, startled, and their eyes met. The woman had a kind face, but her eyes were sharp, studying Anna like she was trying to read her thoughts. Anna looked away quickly. Embarrassed, she turned her back to the woman and took a step toward the cemetery gate. "Wait," the woman called out. Anna hesitated, then turned slightly, just enough to look back. The woman was walking toward her, her pace slow but deliberate. There was something in her expression that made Anna feel uneasy. "Can I help you?" Anna asked, her voice quiet and uncertain. The woman shook her head, stopping a few feet away. "I don't mean to intrude," she said. Her voice was gentle, almost soothing. I noticed you here before. You come often, don't you?" Anna blinked, her brow furrowing. "Yeah, I do." She kept her tone guarded. "Why?" The woman looked at the gravestone. "Your daughter?" she asked softly. Anna stiffened, her heart pounding. She nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah." The woman was quiet for a moment, her gaze lingering on the gravestone. "I know this must be hard for you," she said finally, "but I think there's something you need to know." Anna frowned, her stomach twisting with a mix of confusion and wariness. "What do you mean?" The woman didn't answer right away. She looked back at Anna, her eyes searching her face. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "we don't see everything that's right in front of us, especially when we're in pain." Anna's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice sharper now, defensive. The woman smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "I think there's more to your daughter's story than you realize." Anna felt a chill run down her spine. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You don't know anything about my daughter," she snapped. The woman didn't flinch. She just nodded, her gaze steady. "You're right," she said. "I don't, but I think you should come back. I have something I want to show you." Anna stared at her, her mind racing. "Why should I?" she demanded. The woman met her eyes, her expression calm. "Because it might help you," she said simply. Anna shook her head, taking a step back. "I don't need your help," she said, her voice trembling. The woman just nodded again, her gaze softening. "I understand," she said. "But if you change your mind, I'll be here." Anna turned away, her heart pounding in her ears. She didn't look back as she walked away, her steps quick and unsteady. She didn't know who that woman was or what she wanted, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something she couldn't quite understand. She reached the gate of the cemetery and paused, looking back over her shoulder. The woman was still standing there, watching her. Anna turned away again, her jaw clenched, and walked out of the gate. She didn't need anyone's help. She didn't need anyone at all. Anna stood behind the cash register, her eyes dull as she scanned items. The supermarket was busy, the lines long, and the customers impatient. She could feel the man in front of her shifting his weight, tapping his foot. She knew he was frustrated by how slowly things were moving, but she couldn't make her hands work any faster. "Can you hurry it up?" the man snapped, his voice laced with irritation. Anna's shoulders tensed, but she didn't say anything. She scanned the items mechanically, one after the other, her gaze fixed on the conveyor belt. She could feel her hands shaking slightly. The man huffed loudly, but she ignored it, focusing on finishing his order. When she finally handed him his receipt, he snatched it from her hand without a word, his glare lingering on her as he walked away. Anna took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. Her next customer stepped up, a middle-aged woman with a cart full of groceries. The woman barely looked at her, her eyes fixed on her phone. Anna forced herself to keep going, her fingers moving over the scanner, her back aching from standing for hours. Her mind drifted, the monotonous beeping of the register blurring into the background. She thought of the cemetery, of the strange woman and her cryptic words. The memory made her stomach clench with unease. "Hey, hello?" The sharp voice pulled Anna out of her thoughts. She blinked, looking up. Her manager, Carlos, stood in front of her, his arms crossed over his chest, his face twisted in annoyance. "You've been daydreaming for 5 minutes," Carlos snapped. "Get it together, Anna." Anna swallowed, her face flushing with embarrassment. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the counter. "Sorry," she mumbled. "Sorry doesn't cut it," Carlos said, his voice low and angry. "You keep screwing up like this, and you won't have a job much longer. Understand?" Anna nodded again, her throat tight. She kept her eyes down, avoiding the stares of her coworker. She could feel the heat rising in her face, and her eyes stung with unshed tears. Carlos turned and walked away, muttering under his breath. Anna took another deep breath, trying to calm herself. She forced her hands to move, scanning the next item, her fingers trembling. The customer in front of her sighed impatiently, and Anna bit her lip, her chest tightening. When her shift finally ended, Anna grabbed her coat from the back room and hurried out the door, her head down. She felt the tears welling up again, and she blinked them away, not wanting anyone to see. She walked the few blocks home, her shoulders hunched against the cold. When she reached her apartment building, she climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a struggle. She opened the door to her small apartment and stepped inside, the dim light from the hallway barely illuminating the room. Her mother was asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled up to her chin. Anna watched her for a moment, her heart aching. Her mother looked so frail, her skin pale and her breathing shallow. Anna walked to the kitchen, opening the fridge and pulling out a container of leftovers. She put it in the microwave, leaning against the counter as she waited for it to heat up. The microwave beeped, and Anna took her plate to the small table, sitting down heavily. She ate slowly, her mind still spinning with everything that had happened at work. She thought of Carlos, his angry words echoing in her mind. She thought of the man at the register, his frustration directed at her. She felt so small, so powerless. She was trying so hard, but it was never enough. And then, there was the woman. Anna couldn't get her out of her head. The way she had looked at her, the way she had spoken, like she knew something Anna didn't, like there was something important Anna was missing. It had left her feeling unsettled, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling. Anna put her fork down, her appetite gone. She looked at her mother again, her heart aching. She wished she could talk to her, but her mother was sick. She needed rest, not more stress. Besides, what would Anna even say? She didn't even understand it herself. Anna stood, putting her plate in the sink. She walked to the living room, gently pulling the blanket up around her mother's shoulders. Her mother stirred slightly, her eyes opening just a sliver. "Anna?" she murmured, her voice weak. "Shh, it's okay, Mom," Anna said softly. "Go back to sleep." Her mother's eyes closed again, and Anna watched her for a moment, her chest tight. She turned and walked to her room, closing the door quietly behind her. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands resting in her lap. She thought of the accident, the sound of tires screeching, the sickening crunch of metal, the way her daughter's laughter had been cut short, replaced by silence. Anna clenched her hands into fists, her breath catching in her throat. She could still see it, could still hear it. It haunted her every day, every moment. She had tried to forget, tried to move on, but it was always there, just beneath the surface. And now, this woman had brought it all back. Anna didn't understand why, but she knew she had to find out. She couldn't keep living like this, couldn't keep pretending she was okay. Anna took a deep breath, her hands unclenching. She stood, walking to the window and looking out at the dark street below. She watched the cars pass, their headlights cutting through the night. She thought of the woman's words, of the way she had looked at her. She needed answers, and there was only one way to get them. Anna turned away from the window, her jaw set. She would go back to the cemetery. She would find out what this woman knew. Whatever it took, she had to. Anna walked through the cemetery gates, her eyes scanning the rows of gravestones. It was late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the grass. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know why she had come back. She wasn't even sure what she expected to find. But the strange woman's words had been echoing in her mind for days, and Anna needed answer. She walked slowly toward her daughter's grave, her eyes darting around, searching. As she approached, she saw the elderly woman again. She stood a few feet away from the gravestone, her hands folded in front of her. She looked up as Anna approached, her eyes meeting Anna's with a steady gaze. "You came back," the woman said, her voice calm. Anna stopped a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. "Yeah, I came back," she said. "You said there was something I needed to know, so here I am. What is it?" The woman nodded, her eyes never leaving Anna's face. "I'm glad you came," she said. She stepped closer to the grave, her gaze shifting to the small stuffed rabbit Anna had left there. She knelt down, her fingers brushing over the toy. "Who are you?" Anna demanded. She could feel her patience slipping, the tension in her chest growing. "Why are you here?" The woman looked up at her, her expression soft. "My name is Irene," she said. "I knew your family a long time ago." Anna's brow furrowed, confusion crossing her face. "You knew my family?" she repeated. "What do you mean?" Irene stood slowly, her eyes never leaving Anna's. "Your mother and I, we were friends many years ago," she said. "She probably never mentioned me. We lost touch a long time ago." Anna shook her head, her hands clenching at her sides. "What does that have to do with my daughter?" she asked, her voice shaking. Irene was silent for a moment, her eyes studying Anna's face. "Your daughter was a very special little girl," she said finally. "She had a kind heart. She loved you very much." Anna's breath caught in her throat, her eyes stinging. "I know that," she whispered. "I loved her too." Irene nodded, her gaze softening. "I believe that," she said. "But there's more to her story than you know." Anna felt her chest tighten, her heart pounding in her ears. "What do you mean?" she demanded. "What are you talking about?" Irene took a step closer, her eyes searching Anna's face. "I know this is hard to hear," she said gently. "But your daughter, she knew what you were going through. She understood, even though she was so young. She knew how hard you were trying, and she loved you for it. She never blamed you for anything." Anna's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling. "How do you know that?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "How could you possibly know that?" Irene reached out, her hand resting lightly on Anna's arm. "Because she told me," she said softly. Anna stared at her, her heart pounding. She told you," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Irene nodded, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. "I was here, the day of the accident," she said. "I saw what happened. I was the one who called for help." Anna felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Her knees felt weak, and she stumbled back a step, her eyes wide. You were there," she whispered. Irene nodded again, her gaze steady. "Yes," she said. "I was here. I saw everything." Anna's chest tightened, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Why didn't you say anything?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you come forward?" Irene's eyes filled with tears, her voice cracking. "I wanted to," she said. "But your mother, she asked me not to. She didn't want you to know." Anna felt like she had been punched in the gut. She stumbled back another step, her hands shaking. "My mother," she whispered. She knew you were there." Irene nodded, her eyes filled with regret. "She knew," she said. "She thought it would be easier for you if you didn't know. She thought it would help you move on." Anna's heart pounded in her chest, her mind spinning. She felt a surge of anger, her hands clenching into fists. "How could she do that?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "How could she keep something like that from me?" Irene stepped closer, her eyes pleading. "She was trying to protect you," she said. "She thought she was doing the right thing. She didn't want you to carry any more pain." Anna shook her head, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I can't believe this," she whispered. "I can't believe she would do this." Irene reached out again, her hand resting on Anna's arm. "I know this is a lot to take in," she said gently, "but I promise you, Your daughter loved you. She never blamed you for anything. She wanted you to be happy. Anna's eyes filled with tears, her chest aching. She felt like she couldn't breathe, her mind spinning with everything Irene had said. She looked down at the grave, her vision blurred by tears. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why are you telling me this now?" Irene was silent for a moment, her gaze softening. "I want to help you," she said finally. "I want you to find peace. I want you to let go of the guilt you're carrying. Your daughter wouldn't want you to live like this." Anna shook her head, her hands trembling. "I don't know how," she whispered. "I don't know how to let go." Irene nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I can help you," she said. "But you have to trust me. You have to let me show you." Anna looked up at her, her eyes filled with pain and confusion. "Why should I trust you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Why should I believe anything you're saying?" Irene met her eyes, her gaze steady. "Because I care about you," she said simply. "I cared about your mother. I cared about your daughter. And I care about you." Anna felt her chest tighten, her heart pounding in her ears. She didn't know what to believe, didn't know what to think. Everything felt like too much, too fast. But there was something in Irene's eyes, something that made Anna want to believe her. After a long moment, Anna nodded, her shoulders slumping. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll come back." Irene smiled, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she said. "I promise you, it will be worth it." Anna looked down at her daughter's grave, her heart aching. She didn't know what Irene had planned, didn't know if it would help, but she knew she had to try. For her daughter, for herself. She took a deep breath, her hands still trembling, and turned away from the grave. She walked slowly toward the cemetery gate, her heart heavy but with a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Anna was back at the supermarket. The bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the sound of the beeping registers filled the air. It was another long shift, and the weight of Irene's words was pressing on her. She couldn't shake the feeling, the knowledge that her mother had kept something so crucial from her. The unease gnawed at her, making it impossible to concentrate. She forced herself to smile at the customers, but it felt hollow, empty. She scanned a pack of pasta, her fingers fumbling as she slid it across the scanner. Her heart wasn't in her work today. Not that it ever really was, but now, it was worse. It felt like she was drowning. The customer in front of her cleared his throat. "You missed one," he said. His tone clipped, pointing at a can she had missed in his cart. "Oh, right. Sorry," Anna muttered, her voice barely audible. She grabbed the can and scanned it, but her hands were trembling, and she nearly dropped it. "Are you even paying attention?" the customer asked, his voice full of irritation. Anna bit her lip, her face flushed. She nodded but didn't say anything. She tried to steady her hands, to keep scanning the rest of his items, but her vision blurred, the edges of her world going fuzzy as her thoughts spiraled back to the cemetery, to her daughter's grave, and to Irene's words. Suddenly, the register let out a loud beep, a flashing error message popping up on the screen. Anna stared at it, her heart sinking. The customer groaned loudly. "What now?" he said, throwing his hands up. "I don't have all day for this." Anna's fingers fumbled over the keys, trying to clear the error. Her throat felt tight, her pulse pounding in her ears. "Just 1 second, she said, her voice shaking. The customer crossed his arms, his face twisted in frustration. "Maybe you should get someone who knows what they're doing," he snapped. Anna felt her cheeks flush, her eyes burning. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She couldn't clear the error, no matter what buttons she pressed. "What's going on here?" The sharp voice made Anna jump. She looked up, and her heart sank as she saw Carlos, her manager, walking toward her, his face twisted in annoyance. He stopped beside her, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the register screen. "What did you do?" Carlos demanded, his voice harsh. I don't know," Anna said, her voice barely a whisper. It beeped." Carlos sighed, rolling his eyes. "Step aside," he said, nudging Anna away from the register. He tapped a few buttons, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the screen. Anna stood there, her arms wrapped around herself, her face flushed with embarrassment. She could feel the stares of the other customers, the judgment in their eyes. She bit her lip, her eyes stinging. Carlos finally cleared the error, then turned to Anna, his expression angry. "You know, I'm really getting tired of this, Anna," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone around them to hear. "You keep messing up. You're slow. You're distracted. You need to get your head together or get out." Anna's heart pounded, her face burning with shame. I'm sorry," she whispered. Carlos shook his head, his lips pressed into a thin line. "No, I'm done with sorry. You're fired," he said, his voice cold. Anna's eyes widened, her stomach dropping. "What?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "No, please, I need this job." Carlos shook his head again. "I don't care," he said. "Get out of here, now!" Anna stood there, frozen, her mind spinning. She felt like she couldn't breathe, the world closing in around her. She looked at the customers in line, their faces a mix of curiosity and pity. She felt tears welling in her eyes, but she blinked them away, her throat tight. Without another word, she turned and walked away from the register, her steps unsteady. She walked through the store, her vision blurry, her heart pounding in her chest. She pushed through the door and stepped out into the cold air, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She walked, not even sure where she was going. The world around her felt distant, like she was seeing it through a fog. She felt like she was falling, like there was nothing solid beneath her feet. She had lost her job. She had nothing now. No way to pay rent. No way to support her mother. Everything felt like it was slipping away from her, and she couldn't stop it. When she finally reached her apartment building, she climbed the stairs slowly, her legs feeling like they weighed 1,000 pounds. She opened the door to her apartment and stepped inside, her eyes scanning the small, dimly lit room. Her mother was sitting on the couch, her eyes widening as she saw Anna. "Anna?" she said, her voice full of concern. "What's wrong?" Anna shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. She walked to the kitchen table, her eyes falling on the stack of bills sitting there, the overdue notices glaring up at her. She felt her chest tighten, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Her mother stood, walking slowly toward her. "Anna, talk to me," she said gently. Anna turned to face her, her eyes filled with tears. "I lost my job," she whispered, her voice cracking. I don't know what to do." Her mother's face fell, her eyes filling with worry. "Oh, Anna," she said softly. She reached out, her hand resting on Anna's arm. "We'll figure something out." Anna shook her head, pulling away. "No, you don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "We're going to lose everything. I can't do this anymore." Her mother's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. "We'll get through this," she said. "We always do." Anna turned away, her hands clenching into fists. "I don't know how much more I can take," she whispered, her voice shaking. She walked to her room, slamming the door behind her. She sat on the edge of her bed, her head in her hands. She felt like she was drowning, like there was no way out. She thought of Irene, of the things she had said. She thought of the letter Irene claimed her daughter had left. Anna didn't know if she could trust Irene, didn't know if any of it was real, but she was desperate. She had nothing left to lose. Anna stood, wiping at her eyes. She had to see Irene again. She had to know what Irene knew, what her daughter had wanted to say to her. Maybe it wouldn't change anything. Maybe it wouldn't help. But Anna needed something, anything, to hold on to. She opened her bedroom door and walked back into the living room. Her mother looked up at her, her eyes filled with concern. "I'm going out," Anna said, her voice flat. Her mother frowned, her brow furrowing. "Where are you going?" she asked. Anna shook her head, her jaw set. I need to figure something out," she said. Her mother opened her mouth to say something, but Anna didn't wait to hear it. She turned and walked out the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what she was doing, didn't know if any of it would make a difference, but she had to try. She walked down the street, her breath fogging in the cold air. The sun was setting, the sky a deep shade of orange and pink. Anna walked faster, her steps determined. She needed answers. She needed something to give her hope, something to make all of this pain bearable. She needed to find Irene. Anna walked with a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in a long time. The crisp evening air bit at her skin, but she didn't care. She had to see Irene. She had to understand. The questions in her head were pounding louder than her footsteps on the pavement. She felt angry, betrayed, and utterly desperate. The only person who seemed to know anything about what was happening in her life right now was an elderly stranger from the cemetery. It was nearly dark by the time Anna reached her apartment building again. her stomach in knots. She paused, her eyes narrowing as she noticed someone sitting on the stoop. The silhouette was familiar. Irene. Anna's breath caught in her chest, her pulse quickening. Irene looked up as Anna approached, her face calm but her eyes searching. Anna stopped a few feet away, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "How did you find me?" Anna demanded, her voice trembling with anger. Irene stood slowly, her eyes never leaving Anna's. "I told you I wanted to help," she said quietly. "I needed to talk to you." Anna glared at her, her chest heaving. "You knew my mother?" she asked, her voice sharp. "You knew her, and you didn't think I deserved to know." Irene sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. "It's not that simple, Anna," she said. "Your mother thought she was protecting you." Anna shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "Protecting me?" she repeated, her voice cracking. "By keeping secrets from me? By lying to me?" Irene stepped closer, her eyes filled with sadness. "She didn't want you to carry more pain," she said. "She thought she was doing what was best for you." Anna's heart pounded in her chest, her hands trembling. "You said you were there," she whispered. "The day of the accident. You saw what happened." Irene nodded, her eyes meeting Anna's. "Yes," she said. "I was there, I saw everything." Anna swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Then why didn't you come forward?" she asked. "Why didn't you tell me?" Irene looked down, her voice soft. "Because your mother asked me not to," she said. "She thought it would help you heal if you didn't know. She thought it would be easier for you to move on." Anna let out a bitter laugh, her eyes filled with tears. "Easier," she said, her voice shaking. "You think this has been easy?" Irene reached out, her hand resting gently on Anna's arm. "I know it hasn't," she said. "And that's why I'm here now. Because you deserve to know the truth." Anna looked at her, her vision blurred by tears. She felt a mix of emotions: anger, confusion, desperation. She didn't know if she could trust Irene, didn't know if she even wanted to, but she needed answers. "What truth?" Anna asked, her voice barely a whisper. Irene hesitated for a moment, then looked Anna in the eyes. "There's something you need to see," she said. "But you have to trust me. You have to come with me." Anna stared at her, her heart pounding. "Where?" she asked, her voice shaky. Irene looked toward the cemetery, her expression serious. "Back to where it all began," she said. "Back to your daughter's grave." Anna swallowed hard, her chest tightening. "Why?" she demanded. "Why do we have to go there?" Irene's eyes softened. "Because there's something your daughter left for you," she said. "Something that will help you understand. It's something I've kept safe all this time, waiting for the right moment." Anna felt a chill run down her spine, her hands trembling. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "A letter," Irene said quietly. "Your daughter left you a letter, hidden at her grave. I promised her I'd give it to you when the time was right." Anna felt like she couldn't breathe, her heart pounding in her chest. A letter from her daughter. It felt impossible, like something from a dream. She shook her head, her mind spinning. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Anna demanded, her voice cracking. "Why did you wait?" Irene looked at her, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. "Because you weren't ready," she said. "You needed time to heal. You needed to be ready to face it." Anna clenched her hands into fists, her chest heaving. "And you think I'm ready now?" she said, her voice shaking. Irene nodded slowly. "I do," she said. "I know you're scared, Anna, but I promise you, this will help. It's what your daughter wanted for you." Anna closed her eyes, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She didn't know if she could do this. She didn't know if she was strong enough, but she had to try. She had to know what her daughter had wanted to tell her. "Fine," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll go." Irene smiled, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she said. "You're doing the right thing." Anna nodded, her throat tight. I don't know what to expect," she said, her voice trembling. Irene stepped closer, her hand resting gently on Anna's shoulder. "It's okay," she said. "You don't have to do this alone. I'll be with you every step of the way." Anna looked at her, her eyes filled with pain and fear. She nodded, her breath coming in short, shaky bursts. She didn't know if she could trust Irene, didn't know if any of this would help, but she had to try. She had to do it for her daughter. Irene turned, motioning for Anna to follow her. Together, they walked down the darkened street, the night air cold against their skin. Anna's heart pounded in her chest, her mind spinning with questions. She didn't know what she would find, didn't know if she was ready for the truth, but she knew she had to face it. As they walked, Anna glanced at Irene, her thoughts still tangled. "How did you know my mother?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence between them. Irene looked ahead, her face unreadable. "We grew up together," she said quietly. "We were like sisters once, but life took us in different directions. We lost touch for a long time." Anna felt a pang of bitterness in her chest. "She never mentioned you," she said, her voice edged with pain. Irene nodded. "I know," she said. "She had her reasons. She thought it was easier to leave the past behind." Anna shook her head, her jaw clenched. "She was always trying to protect me," she said bitterly. "But all she did was lie." Irene sighed, her eyes filled with regret. "She loved you, Anna," she said softly. "She thought she was doing the right thing. She made mistakes, but her heart was always in the right place." Anna looked away, her chest tightening. She wanted to be angry, wanted to hate her mother for the secrets she had kept. But deep down, she understood. Her mother had been trying to protect her, even if she had gone about it the wrong way. They walked in silence until they reached the cemetery gates. Irene paused, turning to look at Anna. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice gentle. Anna took a deep breath, her hands trembling. She nodded, her heart pounding. "Yeah," she said. "I'm ready." Irene pushed open the gate, and they stepped inside. The cemetery was quiet, the air thick with the scent of earth and grass. Anna followed Irene down the path, her eyes fixed on the ground. Her steps were slow, hesitant, her heart racing with every step. They stopped in front of her daughter's grave. Irene knelt down, her fingers brushing against the grass. She looked up at Anna, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and hope. "Here," she said softly, motioning for Anna to kneel beside her. Anna knelt, her hands trembling. Irene reached into the ground, pulling back a small patch of grass to reveal a cloth-wrapped bundle. She handed it to Anna, her eyes soft. "This is for you," Irene said. "From her." Anna's hands shook as she took the bundle, her breath catching in her throat. She unwrapped it slowly, her eyes widening as she saw the small, folded piece of paper inside. Her daughter's handwriting was scrawled across the front, her name written in shaky letters. Tears filled Anna's eyes, her heart pounding. She looked at Irene, her voice barely a whisper. Why did she write this?" Irene smiled sadly. "Because she wanted you to know how much she loved you," she said. "She wanted you to know that none of this was your fault. She didn't want you to live in pain." Anna felt the tears spill over, her chest aching. She held the letter close, her eyes closing as the weight of her daughter's love settled over her. She didn't know if she was ready to read it, didn't know if she could handle the emotions that came with it. But she knew, deep down, that this was what she needed. The truth, the love her daughter had left behind. Anna took a deep breath, her hands trembling. She opened her eyes, looking at the letter. She would read it, but not tonight. Tonight, she needed to hold on to it, to feel its weight in her hands, to remember that her daughter had loved her no matter what. Irene stood, her eyes filled with compassion. "Take your time, Anna," she said softly. "There's no rush." Anna nodded, her breath shaky. "Thank you," she whispered. Irene smiled, her eyes gentle. "You're not alone," she said. "You never have been." Anna stood slowly, the letter clutched in her hands. She looked at Irene, her heart full of gratitude and pain. She wasn't alone, not anymore. Together, they walked away from the grave, the night air cold against their skin. Anna's heart was still heavy, her pain still raw, but for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone, and maybe, just maybe, she could find a way forward. The air was thick with the night stillness as Anna and Irene walked away from the grave. Anna clutched the letter close to her chest, her hands trembling. Each step felt like a weight pulling her down, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking in a dream, that none of this was real. But the letter was real, its edges pressing against her fingers, and that gave her some sense of grounding. When they reached the cemetery gate, Irene turned to Anna, her eyes filled with concern. "Do you want me to walk you home?" she asked softly. Anna shook her head, her throat tight. "No, I need to do this alone," she whispered. Irene nodded, her eyes understanding. "I get it," she said. She reached out, her hand resting gently on Anna's arm. "But remember, Anna, you're not alone anymore. You can come to me anytime." Anna looked at her, her eyes welling with tears. She managed a nod, her voice too tight to speak. She turned and walked away, her steps slow, her heart heavy. The letter was tucked into her jacket, close to her heart. She felt its weight with every step, a reminder of what she had lost and what she might yet gain. By the time Anna reached her apartment, the exhaustion had settled deep into her bones. She pushed open the door, the creak echoing through the darkened room. Her mother was sitting at the small kitchen table, her face lined with worry. She looked up as Anna entered, her eyes widening. "Anna," her mother said, her voice full of concern. "Where have you been?" Anna paused, her eyes meeting her mother's. A surge of emotions washed over her. Anger, betrayal, confusion. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I went to see her," she said, her voice low. Her mother's eyes widened, her face going pale. "Who?" she whispered. "Irene," Anna said, her voice cracking. "She told me everything. She told me you knew. About the accident. About everything." Her mother's face fell, her eyes filling with tears. "Anna, why didn't you tell me?" Anna demanded, her voice rising. "Why did you keep it from me?" Her mother's hands trembled as she stood, her eyes glistening. "I thought I was protecting you," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought it would be easier for you." "Easier?" Anna's voice was almost a shout. She took a step closer, her chest heaving. "You think it was easier to live with this guilt, to think it was all my fault?" Her mother's face crumpled, her tears spilling over. "I'm so sorry, Anna," she whispered. I thought I was doing the right thing. I was trying to protect you from more pain." Anna shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "You didn't protect me," she said, her voice trembling. "You lied to me. You made me feel like I was alone." Her mother's shoulders sagged, her eyes closing. "I know," she whispered, "and I'll never forgive myself for that." The room was silent, the air thick with unspoken words and years of pain. Anna looked at her mother, her heart aching. She wanted to hate her, wanted to be angry, but seeing her mother standing there, broken and frail, she couldn't hold on to the anger. She could see the regret in her mother's eyes, the pain she carried. It was the same pain Anna had carried for years. Anna took a shaky breath, her hands still trembling. "I have a letter," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mother looked up, her eyes widening. "A letter?" she asked. Anna nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "From her. From my daughter," she said. She pulled the letter from her jacket, holding it out in front of her. "I haven't read it yet." Her mother's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch the edge of the paper. "Oh, Anna," she whispered. "She loved you so much." Anna nodded, her throat tight. "I know," she whispered. She looked at the letter, her heart pounding. She was terrified of what it might say, terrified of facing the emotions that would come with it. But she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. She had to know. She had to understand. Her mother stepped closer, her eyes filled with tears. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked softly. Anna looked at her, her heart aching. She wanted to say no, wanted to tell her mother to leave her alone, but she couldn't. She couldn't face this alone. She nodded, her breath shaky. "Yeah," she whispered. "I want you to stay." Her mother nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and love. Together, they sat at the small kitchen table, the letter between them. Anna's hands shook as she unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the words written in her daughter's handwriting. "Dear Mommy," it began. Anna's breath caught in her throat, her eyes filling with tears. Her mother reached out, her hand resting on Anna's arm. "You can do this," she whispered. Anna nodded, her heart pounding. She read the words slowly, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Dear Mommy, I know you're sad. I see it in your eyes every day, but I want you to know that it's not your fault. None of it is. I love you so much, and I know you tried your best. I want you to be happy, Mommy. Please don't be sad because of me. I'll always love you, no matter what." Anna's voice broke, her tears spilling over. She clutched the letter to her chest, her sobs racking her body. Her mother wrapped her arms around her, holding her tightly. "It's okay, Anna," her mother whispered, her own tears falling. "It's okay. She loved you. She wanted you to be happy." Anna cried, her body shaking, the weight of her grief finally breaking free. She had held on to the guilt for so long, had let it consume her. But now, with her mother's arms around her and her daughter's words in her heart, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to move forward. They stayed like that for a long time, the room filled with the sounds of their quiet sobs. Anna held the letter close, her heart aching. But for the first time, she felt a sense of peace. Her daughter had loved her, had understood her struggles. She hadn't blamed Anna for anything. She had only wanted her to be happy. When the tears finally stopped, Anna looked at her mother, her eyes red and swollen. I think I can do this," she whispered. Her mother nodded, her eyes filled with love. "I know you can," she said softly. "You're stronger than you think." "Anna?" Anna took a deep breath, her hands still trembling. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She knew the pain would always be there, a part of her. But she also knew she wasn't alone. She had her mother, she had Irene, and she had her daughter's love. She looked down at the letter, her heart full. "I'll try," she whispered. "For her, I'll try." Her mother squeezed her hand, her eyes filled with tears. "That's all she ever wanted," she said. "For you to be happy." Anna nodded, her breath shaky. She knew it wouldn't happen overnight. She knew there would be days when the pain was too much, when the guilt tried to pull her under. But she also knew she had something to hold on to now, something to help her keep going. She had her daughter's love, and that was enough. The morning light filtered through the curtain, casting a soft glow across the small kitchen. Anna sat at the table, the letter from her daughter still clutched in her hand. She hadn't let it go all night. She had barely slept, her mind replaying her daughter's words over and over again. They brought her comfort, but also a deep, aching sadness that made her heart feel heavy. Her mother was at the stove, making coffee. The scent filled the kitchen, warm and familiar, and it helped to calm Anna's racing thoughts. She looked up as her mother set a mug in front of her, her eyes full of concern. "Are you okay?" her mother asked, her voice soft. Anna looked at her, her eyes still puffy from crying. She nodded slowly, her fingers brushing the edges of the letter. "I think so," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She swallowed hard, trying to push down the lump that had formed in her throat. Her mother pulled out a chair and sat across from her, her eyes never leaving Anna's. "You don't have to do this alone, Anna," she said. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I hurt you by keeping things from you, but I want to help. I want to make things right." Anna looked at her mother, her chest tightening. She could see the pain in her mother's eyes, the regret, and she knew, deep down, that her mother had only been trying to protect her, even if she had gone about it the wrong way. "I know," Anna said finally, her voice trembling, "and I want to forgive you. I'm still hurting." Her mother nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "I understand," she said, her voice cracking. "And I'm so sorry, Anna. I never wanted to make things harder for you." Anna reached across the table, her hand resting on her mother's. "I know, Mom," she said. "I know you were just trying to help." They sat there in silence for a moment, their hands clasped together, the weight of the past hanging between them. Anna took a deep breath, her eyes drifting to the letter. She thought of Irene, of the woman's kindness, her willingness to be there for Anna even when she had no reason to be. "I need to try and move forward," Anna said, her voice steady. "For my daughter, I can't keep living like this." Her mother squeezed her hand, her eyes filled with tears. "You're right," she said, "and I'm here for you, whatever you need." Anna nodded, her chest tightening. I think I need to go out today," she said. "I need to find a job. We can't keep going like this." Her mother's eyes widened slightly, a mix of surprise and worry flashing across her face. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" she asked. Anna took a deep breath, her hands still trembling slightly. "No," she admitted, "but I have to try. I can't just sit here and do nothing. I need to do something, for both of us." Her mother nodded, her eyes softening. "Okay," she said. "Just don't push yourself too hard, okay? You've been through so much." Anna gave her a small smile, her heart aching. "I'll try," she said. After finishing her coffee, Anna stood and walked to her room. She looked at herself in the mirror, her reflection almost unfamiliar. Her hair was tangled, her eyes tired and puffy. She took a deep breath, running her fingers through her hair, trying to make herself look somewhat presentable. She put on her shoes, her heart pounding as she thought about what she had to do. The idea of facing the world again terrified her. But she knew she couldn't keep hiding. She needed to find a way to move forward, to rebuild her life, even if it was just one small step at a time. When she stepped back into the kitchen, her mother looked up, her eyes filled with concern. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you?" she asked. Anna shook her head, her voice steady. "I need to do this on my own," she said. "But thank you." Her mother nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "I love you, Anna," she said, her voice cracking. Anna's chest tightened, her heart aching. She walked over to her mother, wrapping her arms around her. "I love you too, Mom," she whispered. "And I'm going to be okay. I promise." Her mother held her tightly, her body trembling with silent sobs. Anna closed her eyes, holding onto her mother, feeling the warmth of her embrace. It was a small comfort, but it was enough to give her the strength she needed. When they finally let go, Anna took a deep breath, her hands still trembling. She grabbed her coat from the hook by the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She gave her mother one last look, her eyes filled with determination. "I'll be back later," she said, her voice steady. Her mother nodded, her eyes filled with pride. "I'll be here," she said. Anna stepped out of the apartment, the door clicking shut behind her. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the street. The world felt too big, too overwhelming, but she forced herself to take a step, then another. She walked down the street, her heart pounding with every step. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know where to start, but she knew she couldn't stop now. She made her way to a small shopping area a few blocks away, her eyes scanning the storefronts. She saw a "Help Wanted" sign in the window of a small grocery store, and her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, her mind racing with doubts, but she forced herself to step inside. The store was quiet, the shelves lined with canned goods and fresh produce. A man stood behind the counter, his eyes widening slightly as he saw her. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice friendly. Anna took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "I saw the sign in the window," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you hiring?" The man nodded, his eyes softening. "Yes, we are," he said. "Do you have any experience?" Anna nodded, her throat tight. "I worked at a supermarket before," she said, "but I was let go recently." The man studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Well, we could use the help," he said. "It's just part-time for now, but if you're interested, you can start tomorrow." Anna felt a wave of relief wash over her, her eyes filling with tears. She nodded quickly, her voice trembling. "Yes, I'm interested. Thank you." The man smiled, his eyes kind. "Great, just come by tomorrow morning, and we'll get you started." Anna thanked him again, her heart pounding as she walked out of the store. She felt a mix of emotion, fear, hope, anxiety. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a small step forward, and that was enough for now. She walked back home, her heart feeling a little lighter with each step. She knew she still had a long way to go, still had so much to face, but she also knew she wasn't alone. She had her mother, she had Irene, and she had the love of her daughter to guide her. When she reached the apartment, her mother looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "You're back already?" she asked. Anna nodded, her lips curving into a small smile. "I got a job," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's part-time, but it's something." Her mother's eyes filled with tears, her hands covering her mouth. "Oh, Anna," she whispered. She rushed to her, wrapping her arms around her. "I'm so proud of you." Anna held on to her mother, her chest tight with emotion. "I'm going to be okay, Mom," she whispered. "I promise." Her mother nodded, her tears falling. "I know you are," she said, her voice cracking. "I know you're going to be okay." They stood there, holding each other, the weight of the past still heavy but beginning to lift, just a little. Anna knew she had a long way to go, knew the pain would always be there, but she also knew she had something worth fighting for. She had hope, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The sun was just beginning to rise when Anna walked out of her apartment the next morning. The air crisp and the sky painted in soft shades of pink and orange. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, her breath visible in the cold air. She felt nervous, her heart pounding in her chest, but there was also a flicker of determination that pushed her forward. The grocery store was only a few blocks away, and Anna walked slowly, her mind replaying everything that had led her to this moment. She thought of her daughter, of her laughter and her bright eyes. She thought of Irene, of the letter, and of her mother's tearful apology. It all felt like a whirlwind, like she was still trying to catch up to the present. But today was a new day, a day where she was taking a step forward. She pushed open the door to the grocery store, the little bell above it chiming softly. The man from the day before, whose name tag read Miguel, looked up from behind the counter and smiled when he saw her. "Morning," he said, his voice friendly. "Glad you came." Anna nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "Morning," she said, her voice quiet. Miguel walked around the counter, motioning for her to follow him. "We'll get you started over here," he said. He led her to a small back room, where shelves of supplies and boxes were stacked against the walls. "It's not too complicated," he said. "Mostly just restocking the shelves and keeping things tidy. Think you can handle that?" Anna nodded, her hands fidgeting. "Yeah, I can do that," she said. Miguel smiled, his eyes kind. "Great. Let me know if you need anything. Just take it one step at a time, okay?" Anna gave him a small smile, her chest tightening. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." Miguel nodded, then left her to start on her own. Anna took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the room. It wasn't much, just a small grocery store, just some shelves and boxes. But it felt like more than that. It felt like a chance to start again, to rebuild something that had been shattered. She picked up a box, her hands trembling slightly, and walked to the front of the store. She started restocking the shelves, her movements slow and careful. It was quiet, the only sounds the soft hum of the lights and the occasional shuffle of footsteps as customers walked by. She focused on the task in front of her, letting it ground her, letting it pull her out of her head. Hours passed, and Anna slowly settled into the rhythm of the work. She felt her hands steadying, her heart calming. She could do this. It was simple, but it was something she could manage. And for now, that was enough. Miguel walked over to her, his eyes bright with encouragement. "You're doing great," he said. "How are you feeling?" Anna looked up at him, her lips curving into a small smile. "I think I'm okay," she said. It's good to be doing something." Miguel nodded, his eyes softening. "I get that," he said. "You just keep going, Anna. You're stronger than you think." Anna felt a lump form in her throat, her eyes stinging. She nodded, her voice too tight to speak. Miguel smiled at her once more, then walked back to the counter, leaving her alone again. As the day went on, Anna began to feel a sense of calm settle over her. The work was repetitive, but it was soothing. She didn't have to think, didn't have to worry about anything but the shelf in front of her. And for now, that was enough. When her shift finally ended, she took a deep breath, her heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. She walked to the counter, where Miguel was ringing up a customer. He looked up as she approached, giving her a smile. "Good job today, Anna," he said. "See you tomorrow?" Anna nodded, her voice steady. "Yeah, I'll be here." She walked out of the store, the sun setting in the distance, the sky painted in warm colors. She felt a small sense of accomplishment, a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. She was doing something, moving forward, even if it was just a small step. When Anna reached her apartment, she opened the door, the familiar creak echoing through the hallway. Her mother looked up from where she was sitting on the couch, her eyes filled with concern. "How did it go?" her mother asked, her voice soft. Anna gave her a small smile, her heart aching with a mix of emotions. "It went okay," she said. I think it's going to be okay." Her mother's eyes filled with tears, her lips curving into a smile. "I'm so proud of you, Anna," she said, her voice trembling. "I knew you could do it." Anna nodded, her throat tight. She walked over to her mother, sitting beside her on the couch. She rested her head on her mother's shoulder, closing her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me." Her mother wrapped her arm around her, holding her close. "Always," she said. "I'll always believe in you." They sat there in silence, the weight of everything they had been through still present, but a little lighter now. Anna thought of her daughter, of the letter, of her promise to her. She thought of Irene, of the kindness she had shown. She thought of the future, of the steps she still had to take, and the road that lay ahead. It wasn't going to be easy. She knew that, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could do it. Later that evening, Anna stood in the kitchen, her hands moving methodically as she chopped vegetables. Her mother sat at the table, watching her, a small smile on her face. "You know, I've missed this," her mother said softly. "You cooking dinner. It feels normal." Anna looked up at her, her lips curving into a small smile. "Yeah," she said. "It does." She finished chopping the vegetables, adding them to the pot on the stove. The familiar scent of onions and garlic filled the kitchen, and Anna felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was such a small thing, but it felt significant. It felt like a step toward something better. As they ate dinner together, Anna felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. The pain was still there, the grief still heavy, but it didn't feel as overwhelming. It felt bearable, and that was enough for now. After dinner, Anna decided to visit the cemetery. She felt the need to see her daughter's grave, to talk to her, to share what had happened. She walked through the quiet streets, her heart pounding with every step. The cemetery gates were open, and she stepped inside, the air cool against her skin. She walked to her daughter's grave, the small stuffed rabbit still sitting there. She knelt down, her fingers brushing the grass, her eyes filling with tears. "Hey, baby," she whispered. "I got a job today. I'm trying, just like you wanted. I'm going to keep trying, for you. I love you so much." The wind rustled the leaves above her, the soft whisper of the branches almost like a response. Anna closed her eyes, her heart aching, but she felt something else too. She felt her daughter's love, still there, still with her. It gave her strength. Anna took a deep breath, her hands still trembling, and stood. She looked down at the grave, her heart full. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, knew there would be days when the pain would come crashing back, but she also knew she had something to hold on to now, something to guide her. She turned and walked away from the grave, her steps steady, her heart lighter. She had hope, and that was enough. Anna stepped into her new routine, one day at a time. The grocery store became a part of her life. The morning walk through the chilly streets, the warm smile from Miguel as she entered, the quiet rhythm of stacking shelves, all of it brought her a small sense of stability. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't solve all her problems, but it helped. It was a small, steady pulse of normalcy that she clung to. She had made the decision to start anew, and that meant finding ways to survive the daily challenges. Anna tried her best to focus on her work, to do the best she could. Even when anxiety tried to pull her down, she had her moments when she felt like her chest was tightening and she could barely catch her breath, like the weight of her grief and fear was too much. But she took it, step by step. On one of her breaks, Anna stood behind the store, leaning against the brick wall. She looked out at the street, watching the people pass by, lost in their own lives. She thought about how much had changed, how her world had shifted since she had met Irene. She still carried the letter with her, folded carefully in her coat pocket. It felt like a piece of her daughter that she could carry, a reminder that she wasn't alone. The back door opened, and Miguel stepped out, his eyes catching hers. He walked over, leaning against the wall beside her, a small smile on his face. "Taking a break?" he asked. Anna nodded, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her coat. "Yeah," she said, "just clearing my head." Miguel looked at her, his expression gentle. "You're doing great, you know that," he said. "I know it's not easy, but you're doing it." Anna felt a lump form in her throat, her eyes stinging. She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm trying." Miguel nodded. "And that's all that matters. You're stronger than you think, Anna." She looked up at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you," she said softly. Miguel smiled, giving her a nod before heading back inside. Anna watched him go, her heart feeling a little lighter. She knew there were still challenges ahead, still obstacles she would have to face, but she also knew she could do it. She had people who believed in her, and she was starting to believe in herself. That evening, Anna returned home, her feet aching from the long day. She opened the door to the apartment, the scent of dinner wafting through the air. Her mother stood at the stove, stirring a pot, her face lighting up when she saw Anna. "Hey, sweetheart," her mother said, her voice warm. "How was your day?" Anna smiled, her heart swelling with a mix of love and gratitude. "It was good," she said. She walked over, peeking into the pot. "What's for dinner?" "Just some soup," her mother said. "Nothing fancy, but it's warm." Anna nodded, her smile widening. "It smells amazing." They sat down together for dinner, the soft clinking of their spoons the only sound in the small kitchen. Anna felt a sense of peace settle over her, a warmth that had been missing for so long. She looked at her mother, her heart full of gratitude for this moment, for this simple, ordinary routine that felt so precious now. After dinner, they cleaned up together, the two of them moving in sync, their movements easy and familiar. When the dishes were done, Anna turned to her mother, her eyes soft. "I was thinking," she said slowly, her voice hesitant, "maybe I could take a night course, to learn something new, get a better job someday." Her mother's eyes widened, her face breaking into a smile. "Oh, Anna, that's a wonderful idea," she said. "I think that would be amazing for you." Anna felt her heart swell, her chest tight with emotion. She nodded, her voice trembling. I want to do better. I want to give us a better life." Her mother wrapped her arms around her, pulling her close. "You're already doing that," she whispered. "Every single day. I'm so proud of you, Anna." Anna closed her eyes, holding on to her mother, her heart full. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that there would be days when she felt like giving up, when the weight of everything would feel too much to bear. But she also knew she wasn't alone. She had her mother, she had Miguel, she had Irene's support, and most of all, she had her daughter's love guiding her forward. A few days later, Anna decided it was time for another visit to the cemetery. She felt the need to talk to her daughter, to share the small steps she was taking, the changes she was making. She walked through the gates, the familiar quiet settling over her. The wind was cool, rustling the leaves above her as she made her way to her daughter's grave. She knelt down, her fingers brushing the soft earth, her eyes filling with tears. The small stuffed rabbit sat there, still and comforting, a reminder of the love that had never left her. "Hey, sweetheart," Anna whispered, her voice trembling. "I got a job, and I'm thinking about taking a course. I'm trying to make things better for me and Grandma. I'm trying, just like you wanted me to." The wind rustled the leaves again, and Anna closed her eyes, her heart aching. She took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs. She felt a sense of calm wash over her, a feeling that her daughter was still with her, still watching over her. Anna opened her eyes, her gaze softening as she looked at the grave. "I love you," she whispered, "and I promise I'll keep trying. For you, for both of us." She stood slowly, her heart heavy but her spirit stronger. She knew the pain would never fully leave her, that the grief would always be a part of her. But she also knew she could carry it, that she could find a way to live with it without letting it consume her. As she walked away from the grave, Anna felt a sense of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life worth living. It wouldn't be perfect, and there would still be struggles, but it would be real, and that was enough. She returned home, the sun setting behind her, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. When she stepped inside the apartment, her mother looked up, her eyes filled with love. "Did you visit her?" her mother asked softly. Anna nodded, her heart swelling. "Yeah," she said. "I told her about everything, about the job, about taking a course. I think she'd be proud." Her mother's eyes filled with tears, her lips curving into a smile. "I know she is," she said, her voice trembling. "She's always with you, Anna, always." Anna smiled, her heart full. She walked over to her mother, wrapping her arms around her, holding her close. "And so are you," she whispered. "And that's all I need." Her mother held her tightly, her tears falling. "I love you, Anna," she said, her voice cracking. "And I'm so proud of you." Anna nodded, her breath shaky. "I love you too, Mom," she said. "And I think I'm going to be okay." They stood there, holding each other, the weight of the past still present but lighter now, the future full of possibilities. Anna knew she still had a long road ahead of her, but she also knew she could face it, one step at a time. She had love, she had hope, and that was enough to keep her moving forward. And as the night settled in around them, Anna felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. She was ready to face whatever came next, ready to build a life for herself and for her mother, a life that honored her daughter's memory, a life that was filled with love and hope. She was ready to move on, and for the first time in a long time, she truly believed that she could.